Okay, welcome back to my Intro to Python. We are in Class 2, Module 2, Understanding Conditional Statements and Decision Making in Python. Now we just finished the last module, which was very long. It was probably the longest module we've had so far, and it covered quite a lot of material. So hopefully you had time to recap, review, and actually create some of those scenarios and play them on your own computer and see how tweaking the numbers and how Python makes decisions and flows the interpreter decides which line of code to execute. If not, no big deal. We're going to go ahead and do a recap kind of the else if or the if, elif, else statements. Then I'm going to show you a little bit more readable version. We call that the shorthand if statements. So it's just the way that we're going to write it out. It writes it on one line of code versus 2 lines of code. And it also makes it a little bit more readable for somebody else looking at your code. Then we're going to explain ternary operators, which are a concise way to do an if-else statement in a single line. So not only can I do a shorthand if statement, I can also look at 3 variables at a time and decide which of the 3 statements I want to print. And we can do that with using our logical and, logical or, and our logical not operators that we've learned about earlier. And then we're going to close with a new command called pass. Pass statements are the equivalent of a no operation, right? So we're just telling the interpreter to look at this code and do absolutely nothing. Just one CPU cycle and move on to the next command. So let's go ahead and recap the if, elif statements. Let's create 2 variables. We'll call it A, and we'll say that equals 100, and we'll say B is equal to 150. Just throwing some numbers out there. If I create an if statement, oops, not phi, if, I'm going to have to do some kind of comparison operator. So I might say A is not equal to B. I can use a not, exclamation equal sign is the equivalent of saying not equal. And then I'm going to do my colon. And now I go down into my block of code for this particular if statement. So let's just do a simple 1 line of code. We'll do our favorite print statement just to put something on the screen for us. And we'll just say A not equal B. Then as soon as I unindent, we're back to the main line of code. So this is a different code block now. I can add an else statement. Remember, I can have 1 else statement per if statement. So in this case, I have the if statement here. This else is going to be linked to this if. So I just put a colon and I do my own block of code. And we'll just say print something like A must equal B because it only prints this if it's not equal. So therefore, if we get to this else, we're going to go ahead and print that they are equal. So that's doing the if-else statement. Remember, each if statement can be paired with 1 else. But I can have multiple elifs. We can just say elif A is less than or equal, well, less than or equal to B. And I can do some block of code. And we can just space that out, copy that, put that on our clipboard, and we're going to go ahead and put that as the print statement, just to make it nice and easy to print. And I'm going to just add 1 more. I'm going to do that. Let's do okay, less than or equal to, well, we're just going to do less than. And I'll do 1 more for greater than. Actually, we'll do greater than up here. So now I have greater, less than, equal to. This is going to be error case. We should never be able to get here, right? It's either A is greater than B, or A is less than B, or they're exactly equal. So this else statement is an error condition. It should never ever get here. Go ahead and run this code, and we see that A is less than B, which makes sense. Let's make them equal. 150. Oops, I got my num lock off. There we go. What did I do wrong here? Where did I, oh, where they're equal, I meant to say equal. That's why it's printing out funny. There we go. So now our logic makes sense. I've got, if I make b less, we'll say that they're not equal, right? Now we should say greater. A greater than b. And we should be consistent. Let's make these lowercase. All right, so now I think I have the logic set up correctly. This is showing if, elif, and else statements. What I want you to do now is I want you to create something similar. And I want you to do this with two variables. Call it person 1 age and person 2 age. And I want to see if you can say which one's older, which one's younger. And let's do it with some input statements. So I'm going to show you how to do input real quick. You use the word input, and you're going to put in a message, enter age of person 1. And then we're going to do the same thing of person 2. Person 2, there we go. Now, whenever we do an input, I should tell you that it creates it as a string. It always puts it as string. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called casting. I'm going to use this keyword int, and I'm going to surround my input statement with an integer declaration, which is actually called a constructor for integer. And that's going to take whatever input they put and try to convert it to an integer. So now here you can tell me which person is older, person 1 or person 2, and you can run this code over and over again. So I can just say this person's 12 and the second person's 21. Then I can say, hey, person 1 is less than or equal to person 2. And I don't want less than or equal to, I just want less than. And I can change A and B to be person. Person 1. And we'll say B is person 2. All right, so that's what I want to see there, recapping how the program works with if, elif, and else statements. Is there a way to do this as shorthand? And the answer is yes. Now I don't know which Python version added this, but let's add some more code blocks here. What I can do is copy this code right here real quick. And I can say, let's say A is equal to 12 and B is equal to 12. Actually, we'll say 14, just for fun. Here I have my if statement that you've seen before. Let's go ahead and run it so you can see what the code looks like. We've always seen it as if some condition, then I do a colon. And then I do an enter, and I do my block of code. But if my block of code is literally one statement, I can put my block of code in front of my if statement. So block of code, and I'll put that as a string just so you can kind of, actually, no, let's do it as underscores. So you can see as one unit. So the way I can do it is I can do if, or I can do block code if my condition is true. Otherwise, I say else, second block of code. And this is equivalent of doing our earlier if, else statement all in one line of code. So this converts something that's at least 4 lines of code to something that's only one line of code. So it gives it down into one statement. But you've got to put your if condition here, and then you have your, if it's true, goes here, and this is if the statement is false, goes here. So let's go ahead and see what an example of that looks like. We'll say print. In this case, we'll say A. If our condition is A is greater than or equal to B, else we're going to go ahead and print B. Go ahead and run that block of code, and you'll see since 14 is greater than 12, this statement is false, therefore we're going to print the else section of code. Now this shorthand is great, but it's only used if each code block is only one line. If I had 2 lines of code, I couldn't do this. I'd have to do it the traditional way. This is just a nice shorthand way of being able to write an if-else statement in one line. Now, if I want to add and statements, we've seen that in the past, so let's talk about the, where's the Cherney operator, where, let's copy this one here. Actually, I have the code down here, I believe. Yep, I did, right here. So this is my example for the ternary operator, where it's using 3 statements. The first thing I do is, it looks fairly similar. This is my one line of code that happens if my statement is true. So here's my statement. If A is greater than B, it's going to print out this. If it's false, it's going to print out everything over here. But what I've done is I've nested them together to another if statement. So this only gets printed if this statement is true, then this gets printed. Otherwise, this gets printed. And you can see how I can nest these things. Now, I do this as an example, not that I recommend doing this. If you actually run this code, you'll see that my var is actually less than my var2. My var1 is less than my var2. So, did I do that wrong? Yes, I did. My var1, let's see, is A greater than B? Oh, this is supposed to be greater than or equal. That's my example. Yes, so my var1 is less than my var2. So that's how this works. Now, very complicated. You don't see this a lot. I just wanted to show you that it exists, but I don't recommend doing it. I recommend, as you start out using this syntax here. It's a little bit more verbose. I'm using more words to express what I want to do, but it's also easier for somebody to read and understand. When you start to get into some more advanced code writing and you understand how it works, yes, you might see these statements. So I want to expose you to them, but I don't really want to see a lot of this in your code today because this is going to be more confusing for you to write and debug and understand. So stick with the traditional if statements with the block of code underneath it, the elif statements with that block of code underneath it, and then finish with the else statement. That's my recommendation. All right, the last thing I want to do on this particular video is talk about a pass statement. And I mentioned that it's a no operation. So let's add a block of code here, and let's say we'll do our traditional statement here like we just did. We'll copy this. And we're going to run this code here. We're going to ask the person for their age, but I'm going to have, if they're equal, I don't really know what I want to do because I'm not quite sure. I haven't figured out that part of my code yet. So I'm going to do a pass statement. So if it gets to my pass statement, it's going to do absolutely nothing. So let's go ahead and run this, and you'll see what I mean when we get to this pass statement. It just kind of ignores it. So we'll say this person's 12 years old, and the second person is 12 years old. It enters and it finishes. This pass statement didn't do anything. But it didn't cause the error, so it actually pretended like it ran a line of code, but the interpreter absolutely just ignored it. If I get rid of it, it's going to cause an error because it needs to have some instruction for this elif block of code. It just needs to know that the instruction is to do nothing. So pass, all it is a good way for saying, hey, I need to do something here in the future. I just don't know what I want to do yet. So I always like to do those with a to-do comment and say, figure out what to do if they are equal, right? So this is just a shortcut way of telling the interpreter that I know I need to do something here, I just don't know what I need to do yet, so just do this blank line of code. All right, and we'll say if they're 12 and this one is 13, there you go. Person 1 is younger than person 2. run it again. We'll say this person's 14 and the other person is 11. Therefore, person 1 is older than person 2. So I got this logic figured out, and it's working great. I just need to figure out what to do for when they're equal. Okay, so that is my quick short video on just understanding how we can make decision statements in Python. And I wanted to expose you to this concept of a short one-line way to do an if-else statement. So the way it works again is I have my single line of code that I want to run. Then I put the keyword if. Then I have my condition statement, whatever that's going to be. It's going to equate to some Boolean response. And then if it's true, it's going to go ahead and do the thing on the left side. If it's false, it goes ahead and does the thing on the other side of the else statement on the right-hand side. There you go. So that is module or class number 2, module number 2.